My name is Jeff Stein. I am the founder and CEO of Macroscope Media. I'm going to talk today about artificial intelligence for investigative journalism. And if there's one sort of takeaway from this talk is to have you thinking in terms of discovery. So I'm going to introduce the concept of discovery as different from search. We're all very familiar with search, thanks to Google. Over the last 20 years. And we do this every day in our investigative work of using Google searches and searching for information related to targets of our investigation. The discovery approach is more of when you don't know your targets or you find surprises in discovering new targets for investigation. This is a very powerful application of artificial intelligence, which is what my company is focusing on. Some of you may have seen my talk yesterday, which focused on satellite imagery. This is my background. We are also offering this as a service of satellite imagery and analysis of satellite imagery for journalists as a free service. But this talk will focus more on this big project we have to develop an artificial intelligence for journalism to enable this discovery at large-scale investigations, things like the Panama Papers. So let's talk a bit about what is artificial intelligence. People use this term very broadly. For the most part, it's really about machine learning, machines having the ability to learn. So this was something very unique to humans, or at least in terms of advanced forms of critical thinking, learning for that. Only 7 years ago in 2011, there weren't many artificial intelligence companies prominently known. But IBM, the famous IBM company, came out with a system called Watson and went on the American game show Jeopardy! Quiz show. And the artificial intelligence system Watson beat the humans. These were the two all-time champion humans from the 20-year history of the TV show. And the Watson machine won in multiple contests. Watson has gone on to become a multi-billion-dollar business for IBM, tens of billions of dollars, widely used in the healthcare industry, now finance industry, for government agencies and other applications. Fast forward only 5 years later in 2016, and we have a whole industry of artificial intelligence companies. Now, this entails things from technology tools, a technology stack around data science, machine learning, natural language processing. This is the ability of computers to understand language, speech. We have things like Siri is well known with Apple, the ability to interact with humans in natural language. It's very useful in translation amongst languages. Translation's gotten much better. It's also being used in computer vision. This is my background. So I'm going to dive into applications for journalism, but you should know that I do have a background of about 5 years in building artificial intelligence business. I was the co-founder of a company called Orbital Insight, which was the pioneer in using artificial intelligence for analysis of satellite imagery. This is computer vision. It's also used by Facebook to recognize your face in photos. It's widely used. We use similar techniques on satellite imagery. There's a lot that's been learned about how to build systems for use in the real world, use in business. Now, what's interesting about all these companies, this is a good snapshot of a lot of the leading artificial intelligence companies in the world today. None of them are doing anything related to journalism. So that's where Macroscope Media comes in, as I'm seeking to bring this technology to our field. I used to be an environmental activist at an NGO in Washington and work closely with journalists there, and that's where I really developed a passion for working with journalism and brought me to start Macroscope and leave Orbital Insight. So a little bit about what I've done in the past. At Orbital Insight, we did a lot of things. We sold products to Wall Street hedge funds, investors. We counted cars in parking lots across America, 200,000 stores on a regular basis would count the cars, and this was an indicator of the sales performance of companies like Walmart. And then investors could buy and sell stock based upon that information. We also tracked oil supplies around the world. A lot of countries aren't very open about their oil inventories, and that's influential on the global price of oil. So we would effectively spy from space on the oil storage tanks to calculate it ourselves and then sell that information to Wall Street. We would track development in China, similarly. A lot of countries, the governments aren't so open about statistics. And so this is very useful for investors. It also drew attention of government agencies. So we ended up, it's kind of like you don't try to just go sell to the CIA, they kind of come to you. That's what happened to us. We sold to 5 different intelligence agencies in the United States. And one of the most interesting projects we did was monitor North Korea for the US government. So I was working with one of the key people in the US military responsible for the drones program in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was a lot of politics around that and the proprietary of that. But from a technical standpoint, it was very much a success from the military's perspective of their idea of being able to always see the bad guys in their mind, right? They called it persistent surveillance. And they came to us with, could they do the same thing for the whole country of North Korea, but do it from space? Because it was more dangerous to fly aircraft over North Korea. They had better air defense systems. So I worked with the Pentagon to organize all the commercial satellites in the world and make North Korea the single most image placed on Earth for the year 2016. And using one satellite's images to then tip another satellite. It's called tipping and queuing. You get information from one satellite. We're automating the processing of the images as they're taken, downloaded from space to Earth, and they go through our artificial intelligence system. We count cars, or in this case, trucks, airplanes, military vehicles, ships in the harbors, land use change detection. We were monitoring every highway in the country, every train line in the country, every harbor, port and harbor. And we were able to get an image of every single spot in North Korea on average every 2 days. And the result was what they call patterns of life. The idea, the military wanted to try to predict where missile launchers, nuclear missile launchers were in North Korea and never lose sight of them. And so as this pilot project, we were able to do, just by tracking the regular vehicle traffic, we were able to predict missile launches, these test missile launches. It was a very high profile project seen by the Secretary of Defense. And in fact, this slide I'm showing you now was actually presented in a briefing to President Obama in the Oval Office. So it was a high profile project. And it's just an example to show you how artificial intelligence is being used in the real world today by government agencies, by Silicon Valley technology companies. And this was my motivation for actually leaving the company that did this to come and start Macroscope and work with journalists, because journalists obviously don't have the millions of dollars that the military had to pay us for that. So it takes a whole new business model to work with journalists, provide this on a free basis, so that journalists are also having the same technology tools that Facebook and Google and the US military are employing. So this is the most technical, hopefully I'm going to get, because I know this isn't such a technical audience of engineers. It's really about the applications, but it will give you some context. In engineering world, we talk about pipelines, technology pipelines. So something goes in and something comes out, and then the output then goes into another process. So the key elements here for the goal is monitoring every company in the world. That's the end goal. Our objective, what we're building over the next 2 years, is a global database of risk profiles, crime and corruption risk profiles for every single company in the world. Not individual companies, a target of investigation you go deep on, but rather we do this upfront, create risk profiles in the links, criminal links of every person and every company in the world, so that that's available right from the beginning for your investigations. So the way to create this is two types of data, structured data and unstructured data. Structured data is just data that's in a database. We can think of it in terms of a spreadsheet, rows and columns, a basic database of information. Unstructured data is usually text, a news story, an article, free text. But there's data and there's information in text. And all our news stories that we're reporting, there are facts being reported, but aren't necessarily in a database. So they need to be taken out of the article and put into a structured form in a database. So that's the next step. So the key sources we're working with to build our system, so just to give you a sense of where we are as a company, we are a startup. We're at the early stage of developing this. What I'm going to walk you through next is a case study that has been the inspiration for developing the system. But just so you have a context where we're at. But the key sources we're working off of is Open Corporates, the largest database of companies in the world, 150 million companies, 200 million directors and officers of those companies. Also, this is the United States Securities Exchange Commission. So every publicly traded company in the world, not just the United States, Canada stock exchanges, European, London, China, Japan, every publicly traded company in the world must file documents. And so we are scraping those. We are taking those documents, putting them into a database, and extracting out key information about what other companies each publicly traded company owns. So we get the corporate structure, we get the beneficial ownership data, we get joint ventures, what loans do they have, what financial relationships, all of this being structured into our database. Other key source is open sanctions. So this is a collection of every sanctions list for companies and people around the world, whether from the United States, Europe, United Nations, or others. And then another really valuable source is OCCRP. They have a system called Aleph. It's found at a website called data.occrp.org. What they're doing is collecting very high value data sets from across the world. You know, they have a strong strength in former Soviet states, Eastern Europe. They have 300 data sets from there. They're now going global. I know doing more data sets from the Middle East and other regions of the world. They're ultimately going to have 6,000 databases. These are national data sets, often from government sources or other sources, or from leak investigations. So we're partnering with OCCRP to also leverage this data with the same system we're building. So we will be bringing artificial intelligence to the work that OCCRP is already doing. In unstructured data, these are just examples. Really, we're looking for thousands of news organizations to pull from their archived news stories and basically index every single news story ever published on the internet related to crime or corruption. My estimate is probably around 5 million stories over the last 20 years. So from these news stories, we are extracting out facts. Things like the Federal Bureau of Investigation is investigating this company, Company X. Or it was, you know, this company was fined $10 million by this authority. So we want these facts put into a database, what is called a knowledge graph. And the reason it's called a graph, it's a regular database, except it's structured in a way to represent the links. So we're most familiar with this probably because of Panama Papers. They have a nice representation and what's called a graph or network structure. That was very common. This is very useful for organized crime representation. So in information processing, there's three. I highlight these in orange because these are actual artificial intelligence techniques. As I showed you in the previous slide, there are many different types or tech methods that are considered artificial intelligence and require machine learning training. But one thing is entity recognition. So what are the names of the companies? This is where the Open Corporates comes in, these other data sources I mentioned. We have databases of all the entities in the world that are significant in terms of names of companies and names of people. So now when we try to read news articles, free text, we know the companies we're looking for. The system knows this. Natural language processing is a way to understand language, grammar, syntax, and not just in English, but in multiple languages. And Then relationship extraction is extracting out the relationship. So for example, FBI is investigating macroscope would be a relationship, under investigation by a certain other entity. Or this entity acquired another entity. This company acquired another company. This director of a company has been put under sanctions. So these are relationships that will be automatically extracted out of the news article, put into the knowledge graph. And the final artificial intelligence technique is called graph mining. People may have heard the term data mining, which is just, say, crunching numbers, doing searching, or various analytical techniques on a spreadsheet or other database. It's similar, but except for a graph, a complex network of relationships. We can mine that to make sense of the network, of the complicated network. So if anyone that's reported on organized crime networks, complex networks, it's very easy to get lost in the details and the complexity. And so it takes a lot of work to really understand the whole and the various relationships. Doing that at scale, at a global scale, is tough for humans, basically impossible, but for artificial intelligence, we can create separate graphs, basically smaller network relationship representations of individual companies and their immediate neighbors, basically their most closely related companies and people. And this is what graph mining does. And this is a pretty cutting-edge field of research in artificial intelligence right now. And this is something we're diving into and applying. We think it's the new advances in this field of research are very applicable to the field of journalism. So I'm happy to answer more questions. We're definitely going to have some time for Q&A at the end to come back to that if people want to dive further. But what I would like to, do you have a question right now? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll pause for.
I just wanted to ask about when you do the search of the New York Times, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and other media,
yeah.
A lot of times they will modify a story, correct a story, and I'm just wondering how the knowledge system takes into account or makes sure that you're capturing updates that might be a day later, a week later, a month later, and corrections.
Yeah, so this is, our approach to this is similar to Google. Google crawls the web, so it's something called a web crawler, and they systematically crawl and index the web so that it's searchable. And that's exactly the approach we're taking here. So we will be crawling the news stories and systematically then catching when they do these updates and then updating that in the database. Another thing, it's a good point though, because that's one of the things you can do in the graph mining is analyze, say, kind of the same story may be reported by multiple news organizations. In America, Fox News often has a different way of reporting a story than the New York Times or a very liberal newspaper, right? And other countries may have different kind of biases or kind of perspectives on it. And so what I found in some investigations I've been involved in is also government authorities may change their story. So they're being quoted about a certain subject, and the quotes will kind of change over time in some of the details. And so that's one of the things our system is aimed at tracking is some of these changes in material statements about companies and people.
Two quick questions. Number one is language. Is this all in English language, or do you support other languages?
No, we're going to support all languages. There probably will be a, one language. It takes some effort to internationalize it. So to do Arabic is a project, to do Russian is another project. But we will systematically go through all the important languages in the world.
Okay, because I know regarding natural language processing in Arabic language, it's almost non-existent. Arabic language is the fourth most difficult language in the world, and getting the context is going to be a big challenge. So you're starting off with English and then moving to other languages.
Yeah, there probably are, so I know there probably are some performance differences, but what I'm presenting to you is actually already the result of 2 years of basically preliminary research to make sure that this is possible. So I've gotten to the point after 2 years that this is possible, and now we're all in. Now we're in the process of raising financing to scale up the company and can do this, but one of the key questions was what you're getting at. And I have found researchers who've done good work on internationalization, some newer approaches to that, that there are some kind of universal representations in all languages, which really surprised me. But then that's the real key to being good at translating and parsing through Arabic or non-Latin languages. So that gave me a lot of hope around this.
My second question is regarding the unstructured data. Do you have any problem actually obtaining that data? Because most of the leading news agencies do not allow organization to use bulk data or access their archive, and their terms of service prohibits you from crawling their archive. So how are you planning on working with that?
Google, for example, crawls. There are a lot of people that crawl. And there's fair use clauses, at least in law in the United States, which is where we're based. And so basically, there are ways to access this data and to use it properly and legally. All right, let me continue with the case study, and then we'll, one more?
Can it also be used actually to create some sort of prediction? Some sort of, does it have some sort of a fuzzy logic concept where it can predict some sort of certain behavior patterns that certain companies can actually do, or for instance, be it so in the Wall Street or certain countries that could take political decisions? Does it have that kind of profiling where it can predict whatever future patterns can actually happen?
Yeah, so I'll be very specific. Yes and no. So our goal is not to try to predict, will this company be committing crimes in the future? However, you get a fuzzy logic. We are predicting whether links or relationships already exist between, say, two companies or two people, which is considered a form, it's called link prediction. So this is basically, it will be a score. It will be a confidence score on a scale of 0 to 100% confidence about how confident the artificial intelligence system is that these two people are related, that they're working together. So for example, somebody that's under sanctions and maybe is known for nuclear trafficking, and they have another business person who's then affiliated with some other company that hasn't been associated with the crime, but how closely related do we think these two people are? Because, for example, somebody else could have the same name or something, right? So a generic name like Michael Smith, which actually I have in the example I'm about to show you, there's a million Michael Smiths. So that doesn't tell you very much. But when you have Michael Smith with a specific address, who's on the director of multiple companies that we can see are all related, then it gives you a higher confidence that this Michael Smith is in fact associated with these people. All right, let's dive into the case study, show how this kind of all applies. I'm going to actually jump out. This case study is about a company called MFC Bank Corp. And its origination is, I was working with journalists in Venezuela. So yesterday I presented about satellite imagery, how to use satellite imagery for investigative reporting. We've done about a dozen stories with OCCRP or other people that are other news organizations affiliated with their network or ICIJ's network. And so one story that I've been working on for more than a year with journalists in Venezuela was around a question of what started as gold mining in the Amazon rainforest in southern Venezuela and trafficking of the gold, and why was the government inviting in international companies and actually paying them $1 billion to come back, companies that they had previously kicked out of Venezuela 5 years earlier. And one of the companies had only 8 employees, and it didn't make sense. Why were they getting brought back? These companies had filed lawsuits under the International Court of Arbitration, and it was very suspicious. And also, what we found suspicious is that there was a clay mine that was located right next to the gold mine. And this clay mine was mentioned by Vladimir Putin, actually several times during visits to Venezuela to meet with President Hugo Chavez at the time. The name of the company is Ruscalin. And this clay company had 30 employees. You know, clay, like who cares about clay? Why would Vladimir Putin care about industrial clay? But he's mentioning that it's a great example of the cooperation between the two countries, along with Gazprom, Lukoil, you know, these gas and oil companies, which are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And then you've got this one company with 30 employees, which drew our interest. So this is a traditional investigation. What's going on here? We found evidence of, basically, the investigation started questioning, could it be that this clay mine may actually be something else like uranium? It had long been rumored that Venezuela had cooperated with Iran in mining uranium. And not only, by the way, we'll be pulling news stories, but also from the web archive, because a lot of these stories may, you know, news sites may not keep it current, or there's information that's valuable that then gets removed from the internet. And this is one of the very important sources is the Internet Archives. And in fact, what we found was a meeting between Venezuela geologists and Iranian geologists in Tehran. This is photos on the Iranian Mining Ministry's website with a map, which the journalists were working with in Venezuela had been talking their sources, and this map was a secret map. It was widely known that Iran and Venezuela cooperated in mapping the geology and the resources and things like uranium, but the end result map was never seen by the Venezuelans, even though it was of their country. And we found the map on the Internet Archives from the Iranian Mining Ministry's website with a spot for uranium in green at the location of this clay mine we were researching. So this got us very interested, and this then became the catalyst for who the heck are the Russians? They're this Ruscalin. Who are the people behind this company? And that's what I'm going to show here. Go ahead.
I just wondered, did you spot the map by chance, like by eye, or did you spot it using one of the?
No. So I'll also clarify the case study I'm going to present here was old-fashioned reporting, but it was a year's worth of reporting in literally 50,000 Google searches. Very tedious. Basically the only reason we got the story is like I was motivated because I knew there was the potential to do something with artificial intelligence here. And I was just as much motivated by the learning, but it was pretty ridiculous how much work went into finding things like this. But because I have this background in working with artificial intelligence, I know what computers can do and what they cannot do. And about 90% of the facts of what I'm going to present here in this case study can be found automatically through the computers. And I'm going to point those out. So this would not be a computer. This is the ability to identify a photograph and kind of make sense of the meaning. And that's actually a big point of what I'm trying to do here is we want to automate the simple lookups about, well, who are the people behind this Russian company so that the humans, you guys in this room, are focusing on the deeper questions, the ones that humans are good at is, what is the meaning of this photo? What's the significance? How credible is it? And so forth. But this gives you a context of the starting point. What we found as we dug into this is this Russian company, the owners that set up this clay mine had a whole history in other countries, in Thailand, in Europe, in doing business with sanctioned companies in Iran or companies that will become sanctioned in a few years. They're associated with a $100 million fraud in Thailand of a bank that actually really affected their economy. They had a pattern of asset stripping, basically buying publicly traded companies, stripping their assets, and money laundering. We found documents within the Panama Papers database, specifically of money laundering associated with their businesses in Venezuela, of $580 million being money laundering there. All of these, what I'm showing you, I'm not going to walk through each of them, but basically these are a variety of sources kind of categorized by kind of call them crimes or illicit activities, things like sanctions evasion and counterfeiting, but are from news stories. So this is why it's important to not just rely upon existing databases of facts, but really you need to dig into traditional news articles, press releases from government agencies. We've got things like the US Treasury Department's a great source of the sanctions list. Even the Kremlin's website had valuable things. So we'll be indexing things like that, crawling for things like that. In counterfeiting, this crime network acquired at the same time they're going into Venezuela, they secretly acquired a paper mill in Switzerland that was the exclusive supplier of paper for the Swiss franc. And also, it was one of only 9 licensed suppliers for the euro at the time that the euro was launched. So they work through complex shell structures, but this is a publicly traded company at the center of it, and so there's public documents about it. Painstaking work to kind of link it all together, but this is all from the open internet research to determine this. Also, the person that was put in charge of that paper mill happened to be under US sanctions at the time. So it was a publicly traded company, but they chose to hire somebody who was already under US sanctions for being a banker to Slobodan Milosevic, the dictator of Serbia during the Balkan Wars, and had been the banker there. So actually, and then OCCRP helped us determine that this person was actually the best friend of the dictator. So very close person relationship. So again, gumshoe traditional reporting combined with the more automated techniques to connect the dots, but then you want to dig deeper with follow-up from traditional sources. Lots of shareholder lawsuits, an interesting pattern of Koreans being directors of various companies in this network. And these aren't Korean companies, these are companies in Switzerland or Canada, and a variety of Koreans. And given the other activity, we suspect that these are actually North Koreans. Weapons trafficking, the personal wealth gained by the principals that were involved in Venezuela. An association, close association with one of the key oligarchs in Russia, in uranium mining, as I mentioned. Plus a tie to Trump Tower in terms of where this was started. So these are just sort of like summarizing there, but I'm going to jump back into a little bit of this. I'll highlight a few things. So what I'm doing is I'm giving you like a few different views of the same facts, okay? And then I'll actually give you a little bit of the story. You probably can't read stuff here, so I'm just going to narrate a little bit. But this, what I showed you before was basically a list, and that's probably the way the reporters often are organizing their work, is through various different sources, and you categorize it by subject matter or topics that you're going to cover in your story as you write your story. Now, another way to represent the facts in a story like this is a network. So we have MFC Bancorp. This is the publicly traded company at the center of the network, crime network, which was spun out from a company called Mercer International, which was a paper company. As I mentioned, had acquired the paper mill in Switzerland that was the exclusive supplier of the Swiss franc, and stating that it was their major strategy, a shift from making toilet paper, tissue paper and toilet paper, very low value paper, into high value paper sold to central banks for the currencies. And then within 12 months, they divested out of that firm and sold it, basically put it in a joint venture with a subsidiary of their former subsidiary, MFC Bancorp. So a lot of this self-dealing, which is a common pattern for money laundering or organized crime activity. And this is the entity that, as I mentioned, was run by the former best friend of Slobodan Milosevic, which raises red flags, along with having suspicious Koreans, likely North Koreans, on the board of directors of this opaque company. So that's one suspicious activity that stands out. Again, we started in Venezuela, and what drawing us here is the head of the company in Venezuela, Andrei Agapov, was also the director of a holding company of this entity, as well as a director in the securities business. They had two main branches of the overall firm, and plus one of the other subsidiaries, trade financing. But it's common that holding companies are sort of the true beneficial owners here. And we see a co-occurrence of this guy, Andrei Agapov, with a Swiss lawyer named Luke Hemmeler. So, usually lawyers aren't such key figures in stories necessarily. If you've got a lawyer who's got 1,000 clients and one of them happens to be a Russian oligarch or, somebody that's, under a criminal investigation, that doesn't necessarily tell you much about that lawyer, right? Because they have so many clients. In this case, this lawyer had about 40 clients and 20 of them were Russian. So he clearly specialized in Russian and Eastern European clientele, multiple whom were Russian oligarchs or businesses of Russian oligarchs. And so that draws more attention, really casts in a different light. And this is a sort of distinction that our artificial intelligence system will be able to distinguish. Going back to the other gentleman's question about prediction, this is what we call link prediction. How significant is this Swiss lawyer in the network? And our system would, based upon a variety of criteria, have him rise up as more significant. So seeing that the Russian who went into Venezuela at the suspected uranium mine had set that up, not only was he serving on the boards of directors of companies in Switzerland with the Swiss lawyer, but also the initial entities set up in Venezuela were also done with the same Swiss lawyer. So this is what drew our attention into this MFC Bancorp in the first place, and we dug deep into it. We also found that along with the Swiss lawyer, the same guy from Venezuela, the Russian, set up these holding companies in offshore companies in Cyprus, registered to the address of Trump Tower, which also happened to be the address, the residence and office address of his former boss, because prior to him working for this MFC, he was working in Thailand for this Russian oligarch. Now that was publicly reported in news articles, but again, this linking of addresses, this is something that artificial intelligence systems can do. Things like looking up people's names, what companies are they directors of, who are the other directors of the company, what other companies those same directors also a director of, who are the other people associated with that, what are the addresses of those people or the companies. Very simple searches, which I'm sure many of you have spent too much of your lives on the internet trying to look up. And these are the sort of simple tasks that our system is seeking to automate. Those are some of the other key things are, in addition to buying the paper mill, at the same time they acquired a nuclear power plant in East Germany. That was 85% complete, so it was never completed, but that could be quite useful for trafficking because there's valuable equipment in there. They also at the same time acquired a business that was selling cement to businesses in Iran that were sanctioned and known for helping evade sanctions there. So it's basically the combination of several, an entity that could be used for counterfeiting, be very useful for counterfeiting, nuclear trafficking, sanctions evasion, puts all into light a different context of what we initially were investigating in Venezuela. Yes?
With this particular graphic, did your software create it? How much of it was created manually or totally automated?
So, to be transparent, this is initially created through traditional methods, reporting methods, human methods. But what we are doing is we are reverse engineering the system from this. And I can tell you 90% of the facts and the relationships in this network, actually 90%, can be determined by the system. So this is what has become the basis for actually building a company and at this point now raising financing. About $5 million we'll be raising in the next few months to start scaling this up. And the goal is within 2 years that we actually have a system that's available for you guys. Hopefully it's even sooner, but that's probably the realistic timelines within 2 years that this would be available. We'll probably be making it available through OCCRP and ARIJ through these partners. But basically what you would do is you would have either investigations you're already doing and then you want to look up in the system like a traditional database, but it has these rich relationships, or to be able to say focus in on an individual country like Qatar or like Jordan or like Saudi Arabia. And I think of it like a heat map, is that you won't need to know ahead of time just the known powerful people or wealthy people, political figures to investigate, but are there people like a Swiss lawyer that you never knew about, or this Russian Andrei Agapov, who's hasn't been reported on much, would surface to the top as higher risk? Yes.
I mean, LexisNexis, those
Yeah.
tools exist. I mean, most organizations I know in France have not the means to pay for them.
Yeah. So our model is, this is free for journalists. We have a public interest mission, and the way that we'll be able to support that is this system will be valuable for commercial businesses too. And the key target for that is large banks. So there are very strong laws in the US and Europe for fighting money laundering, anti-money laundering compliance. They spend billions of dollars. And this is a radically different approach than they currently take, because a lot of the bad guys are still doing business with the big banks, the big Western banks, and they know that. And there's a lot of risk that they face around that. And so I have spent time with the banks, talking to them about this approach, and they're very interested in that. And again, that made me confident to go forward with that there will be sufficient financing basically from these banking customers. Anything that would be sensitive, like leak data, will be firewalled, will be segregated off, and would not be made available to any commercial customers. Only the public sources, like from government sources, that data would be available for the commercial system. So the journalists will even actually, it will be free, and it will actually even be even a broader, more comprehensive, basically the most premium version will be available for journalists for free.
Was leaked and then becomes news stories.
Well, the source document leaks would still not be put into a commercial system, but the story, that's in public domain, so then, of course, that would go into the commercial system. Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, I thought a lot of these data will be saved on cloud systems.
Mm-hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So those two questions.
Yeah, so there's, these days, everything is going into the cloud, and so security will be very important, and especially for things like leaks, That was important for Panama Papers, but you can implement very secure systems in Amazon Cloud. I mean, the CIA is on Amazon Cloud, so it's taking that sort of serious approach to security that the intelligence agencies do. And I had to deal with that in my last company with the work I did, although I myself didn't have security clearance, but I'm familiar with those approaches to security and will be investing in it. The other question was about how accurate, basically, or error rate. Absolutely, there will be error. It's not that one should take what would be found in the system and automatically just write up in the next 20 minutes the story. There will have to be verification, and this is where the humans come in. As I don't see the computers ever writing the stories, for example. But what we are seeking to do is to give some sort of confidence score, and especially with feedback over time from the journalists about how good it is or how not good it is, that we will continually be improving, so that as ever the confidence or the accuracy we represent data as having would actually be what the journalists would experience. That's the goal. But I'm sure at the beginning there will be some variance, and this will be an ongoing conversation to get feedback and keep improving the system. Other questions? Not sure if I had more. This is actually... I mean, one of the sort of things for kind of big picture kind of summary is really moving from the search to discovery. That's really what's new here, doing this at a global scale. Usually the thing that prevents that is, well, geez, that's very expensive. And it is relative to the kind of the budgets we work with in the journalism world, but this is how Google thinks, this is how Facebook thinks, this is how Twitter thinks. I'm in Silicon Valley, kind of been there for a long time, and so I'm just trying to bring that sort of thinking to the field of journalism, probably for the first time, And what if we were to take a web scale approach? What if we were to look at the whole internet and not just one project at a time, or even one huge leak project at a time, like the Panama Papers, which is incredible. But I believe that basically we'll find 100 or 1,000 times more power and impact of treating the whole internet, the global internet, as a giant leak like the Panama Papers. And what I showed you with the story in Venezuela and the Russian mafia example was purely based off of open sources on the internet. 50,000 searches, but humans get tired and they need to go to sleep. The computers never need to go to sleep. And so really this is a shift to approach of discovery. And that means you're finding surprises, you're finding things that are anomalous, new links between entities, between companies that you didn't know were associated with each other. This is the link prediction. This is a form of prediction. Or that some company in your country that you may have already known about, but you didn't realize was associated with crime. Or you see in a new light because of a secret hidden connection, a new relationship, or the changing significance of some company and its role. Yes?
In terms of privacy issues here, for instance, using the satellite and using any kind of information processing with all these different tools that are actually existing, are you liable legally in any way towards any entity for exposing any information, or do you have some sort of policy protection to your clients that you identify security, privacy for you?
I mean, the issues that we'll face are the same issues that news organizations like your own or ICIJ face as well. So, this is working closely with them and legal advice around that. So ICIJ chose not to publish all the raw documents to the public, which makes sense because there's personally identifying information. They also had to deal with, wanting to get the information out there about who's in the Panama Papers, but also just because somebody's name doesn't mean that they engaged in a criminal act. And even a lot of things that are not very ethical or pretty unsavory business practices may actually be legal, and a large part of the problem is the laws themselves, right? So these are things that they've had to navigate and would definitely apply to us, and we'll basically, really what we'll do is we'll be following the lead of organizations like ICIJ, OCCRP, Global Investigative Journalism Network, ARIJ, basically these international organizations that have thought a lot about that, and we plan to be engaged and participate. And there might be new issues because of the technical approach, and one of the things we'll probably do is set up like an advisory committee of experienced journalists to guide, advise us on that. Other questions? All right. If no more questions, I'm available to talk, afterwards, one-on-one. And thank you, everyone, for joining and listening.